Shang Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings was and still is by far one of the best Marvel movies ever made, and I can definitely say that it's one of the better, more recent post-Avengers Marvel movies that we've gotten. So today, I'm here to do my very first Marvel vs. Battle video. I'm pretty excited to do this. I had made a community post earlier about how I was going to do Marvel content, and majority of y'all chose this topic, which I am so glad y'all did, because Shang-Chi is definitely one of my favorite Marvel characters. But real quick before we get started, if y'all haven't yet, please subscribe to the channel, and if you like today's content, be sure to leave a like and comment below what you think. I can't tell y'all enough how much I appreciate the support y'all keep giving, especially as I continue to branch out into different topics of media. Y'all are the best subscribers, don't ever forget that. With all that said, let's get into it. So just in case anyone's wondering, this is going to be just the characters from the MCU. I'm not entirely sure if most of y'all were wanting the comic book version of Shang-Chi vs. the Avengers, or the MCU version of Shang-Chi vs. the Avengers, or both. But I'm going to have to say that it's mainly going to be about the MCU versions of the characters. Reason being is because even though I am familiar with the comics and have read quite a few of them, I can't say that my knowledge of the comics is extensive enough to do the most justice if I were to do a versus battle video between Shang-Chi and the Avengers. And don't worry, as I branch out to do more Marvel videos, I will be researching and reading more of the comics to have more of a better understanding and handle on these topics. So with that said, if y'all would want a comic book version of Shang-Chi vs. the Avengers in the future, I will definitely be willing to do so after I brush up on the comics. So with all that said, for clarity, this is going to be Shang-Chi from Marvel's Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings versus each Avenger. Now to save time and not bombard y'all too much with this video, I'll mostly be covering each of the Avengers that were displayed in Avengers Age of Ultron. So pretty much the core Avengers, along with some other notable Avengers such as Spider-Man, Black Panther, Captain Marvel, and Doctor Strange. I know that Doctor Strange isn't technically an Avenger, but I still thought it'd be cool to include him. But just to make sure everyone is clear, I'll be using each of the Avengers from Avengers Infinity War and Endgame. So to start this whole thing off, I'll cover the abilities of Shang-Chi and the Ten Rings. I'll go over the abilities of each Avenger as we go, but I wanted to quickly cover Shang-Chi since he's pretty much the main focus of the video, and he's presumably less well known compared to the main Avengers. But it's also important that we discuss both of Shang-Chi's parents and their abilities, as well as Shang-Chi's aunt specifically notes to him in the movie, "You are a product of all who came before you, the good and the bad," meaning both his mother and his father. So on one side we've got Wenwu, the legendary warlord and straight-up conqueror, also known as the Mandarin. This dude wasn't just any fighter. Wenwu was already a beast in martial arts, but when he stumbled upon the 10 Rings of Power, his power level skyrocketed. Now in the MCU, the origins of the ring is still kind of murky. Some say he found them in a crater, others say he found them in a cave, but in the comics, these bad boys came from the McLuhans, a race of alien dragon-like beings, and they're actually rings that were worn on the fingers instead of on the hands, whereas in the movie, they're kind of like wristbands or armbands, so to speak, but they're still pretty much next level. These rings can pretty much do everything. We're talking like enhanced strength, super speed, projectile blasts, concussive energy waves, and even the ability to fly by launching each one of them into the air to use as platforms. They respond telepathically, and their strength scales based on how many you're wearing. Wenwu usually splits 5 on each arm for balance, but if he moves all of them to one side, that punch is devastation incarnate. And Shang-Chi, man said, "Okay, bet, and I'll strap him onto my legs to power up his kicks." Wenwu wasn't just flashy either, he was deadly. He took out a member of the Iron Gang with a single ring to the face at point blank range, deflecting bullets like it was nothing, launching himself in the air like Iron Man if he was, had vibes and not tech. And when the rings are tossed, they hover and emit this glowing energy field and can come right back on command. We also see that the rings can be used for defense. Wenwu spins them fast enough to create a protective barrier, and both he and Shang-Chi have used them like whips or tethers. As a matter of fact, Shang-Chi used this to grab a hold of his sister before she fell off the Great Protector Dragon. These rings also basically pause your aging. Wenwu lived for over 1,000 years while looking like he was still in his 40s. But they won't save you from any death or supernatural attacks, as we see that the Dweller in Darkness still straight up killed him. And the rings themselves aren't just tools, they are semi-sentient. They seem to react when in the presence of beings connected to the Great Protector, the mystical dragon of Ta Lo, which Shang-Chi and his mom, Ying Li, used the Ta Lo fighting style. They literally changed the ring's color from blue to gold. In their final showdown in the movie, Shang-Chi managed to grab 5 rings at first, but then the other 5 straight up chose him, flying off from Wenwu mid-fight. Once he had all 10, he was about to launch a Kamehameha item, new powers were pretty much unlocked. We're talking like massive golden energy blast. Dude was literally almost about to one-shot Wenwu. Now Shang-Chi wasn't just powered up by the rings. He was also powered up by his mom, so to speak. Ying Li was no ordinary human. She was the guardian of Ta Lo, which is a hidden dimension filled with magical creatures. She had a bond with the Great Protector Dragon, which is a literal dragon, and dragons in the MCU, they are on another level. Magical, ancient beings, and their scales alone can tank Soul Eaters. It's implied that Shang-Chi inherited some of the dragon magic too. Enhanced strength, durability, and manipulation, and beautiful flowing combat style that literally turns fighting into a dance. His mom passed on more than just tradition, she also passed on a birthright. So when you put it all together, Shang-Chi is the perfect fusion of Wenwu's raw power and Ying Ling's mystic grace. A warrior chosen by both ancient magic and cosmic weapons.
There is the quandary about whether or not Shang-Chi can actually use the power of the Great Protector, so to speak, while he's not in Ta Lo. Because at the beginning of the Shang-Chi movie, Shang-Chi asked his mom, if the rings were so powerful, how were you able to beat him? She says, where I come from, we are empowered by the Great Protector. She says right after that when you had the heart of our dragon, you could do some amazing things. Shang-Chi then asks if you can still use those powers, and she says, no, I left those powers in Ta Lo with our dragon. So if you really wanted to say that Shang-Chi can't use his Great Protector power or whatever you want to call it, while he's not in Ta Lo, then he is just a normal human without the rings. But if you still want to say he can still retain the power from the Great Protector while he's not in Ta Lo, then I think you can put Shang-Chi without the rings at like sub-superhuman level.
The director of the Shang-Chi and the Ten Rings movie notes that by the end of the movie that the 10 rings of power themselves could have the same power level as Thor or Hulk. Now, he does kind of imply this might be something in the future, but I still thought it was worth noting. Something else I thought was worth noting is that when it comes to his attributes from his father, Wenwu trained Shang-Chi and had him trained by other deadly fighters from the 10 rings, from the age he was 8 till he was 14. And what I think is interesting and is, again, important to note, is that Wenwu, who is over 1,000 years old, believed at the age of 14, Shang-Chi was fully capable of carrying out deadly missions on his own. I also do think it's worth noting that Shang-Chi at the beginning of the movie does do workouts every day, just casually, so it's kind of implied that he's still trained on the regular. Now, with all that out of the way, we can finally start with the first respective fight with the Avengers. Shang-Chi versus Black Widow. Now, I think this one will go without saying, but Shang-Chi would have the edge here, like, wildly. Don't get me wrong, by the time of Infinity War and Endgame, Black Widow is definitely one of the more capable fighters, especially in hand-to-hand. I mean, she's trained to be a fighter arguably as long as Shang-Chi. But the difference is she wasn't trained by the likes of Wenwu and the 10 Rings. And being that Wenwu was only ever beaten by Shang-Chi and his mother in hand-to-hand, I just don't think Black Widow has what it takes. The same is probably true for the next Avenger, which is Hawkeye. His skill in hand-to-hand seems to be on par with Black Widow in Civil War, but his specialty is obviously long-range combat. And obviously, Hawkeye excels at it. But the problem for him here is that in the beginning of the Shang-Chi movie, we see that Wenwu is able to deflect multiple projectiles shot at him from all directions by using the rings to make a force field. The same is probably going to be true for Hawkeye's arrows, and to be honest, I think that's the worst case scenario. It's just as likely he'd be able to avoid most, if not all, the arrows with his reflex and agility. Actually, worst case scenario, he has to combine his agility reflexes with the 10 rings. And unlike Hawkeye's arrows, the rings don't seem to have a finite amount of energy or a certain time limit for how long they can be used for. At least not any that's shown in the film. So yeah, this one goes to Shang-Chi as well. Next up is Shang-Chi versus Quicksilver from the Age of Ultron movie. And I'll be honest, this one's kind of tricky. I mean, there hasn't really been too many feats from Quicksilver in terms of combat speed or how fast he can throw his hands, but if I had to guess, I feel like the same would apply to his travel speed. The only ways I see Shang-Chi taking this is hopefully by reacting in time to put up a force field to knock Quicksilver back or something. He also might be able to punch the ground with the rings hard enough to distribute the ground beneath Quicksilver as he's running to throw him off. Shang-Chi does also have a slight aerial advantage, being able to use the rings as platforms to jump in the air. I don't know how much this will help to his advantage against Quicksilver here, but I did think it was worth considering. Now, durability wise, it's going to take a lot for Quicksilver to finally end the fight with Shang-Chi, especially with the dragon scale armor. And like I said earlier, during Wenwu's encounter with the Iron Gang, he was able to block bullets being shot at him from point blank. So if we put Shang-Chi relative to Wenwu, maybe Shang-Chi has at least some speed to help him combat Quicksilver. But ultimately, unless Quicksilver has a moment of stupidity like grabbing Thor's hammer as he was running, or if he's taken off guard like how Hawkeye shot him from below the floor, then Quicksilver has the edge in this, and I'd say about 7 to 8 out of 10 times. I mean, just as a point of reference, even though it's a different multiverse, I guess, we saw what Quicksilver was able to do to Apocalypse in the X-Men movie, so, I mean, there's that. Now, Shang-Chi versus Wanda, on the other hand, is a bit of a slightly quicker round, quote-unquote. Now, again, this is Wanda from Infinity War and Endgame. In those films, she's able to hold her own a decent enough against Thanos' minions, and she didn't have too many durability feats, but she is durable enough to survive a hit from Proxima and Midnight, who Captain America did kind of struggle against. But a punch from 5 to 10 rings are going to be much more powerful. So if Shang-Chi lands 1 to maybe 3 hits on her, she might be cooked. Now, conversely, if Wanda also happens to land a good couple hits on Shang-Chi, he might be cooked, even with the dragon armor. Like, Wanda was able to hold off a 5 Infinity Stone wearing Thanos for quite a while, long enough to destroy the Mind Stone within Vision, which is a crazy feat in and of itself. Shang-Chi will win if he lands his attacks on her before she attacks him. However, if he can't, all it takes is 1 to 2 hits from Scarlet Witch and Shang-Chi is dead. That's not really even mentioning that if she gets a hold of him the same way she did against Thanos in Endgame, unless he's able to still projectile throw the rings while he's caught, then he'll likely be crushed. But if he is, then he can still get out of it. So with that, I would say that Wanda probably holds the edge in this, but I would probably give it 50-50 at best.
There's also a possibility that if Wanda can get in close or do so from a safe distance, she could also create an illusions over Shang-Chi and put him in like a genjutsu from Naruto type deal. And while he's incapacitated, she could take the win that way. So there's that also.
Speaking of Vision, let's move on to him. Now, in terms of hand-to-hand, I'd still put Shang-Chi above Vision. And in terms of raw power with the rings, I'd say he's on par with Wanda from Endgame. So, in theory, he should have the edge over Vision. But Vision has 2 important things going for him here. The first is flight. Now, I know Shang-Chi can utilize the rings as platforms in order to gain higher ground, but Vision being able to completely fly around the battlefield freely and easily does seem like it gives him better utility as far as a high ground advantage. The second and probably most annoying thing is the ability to phase. For Naruto fans out there, I doubt I need to go into detail about how broken this ability is, especially when you can use it freely without any drawbacks. Vision being able to completely phase through all attacks pretty handily gives him an edge over Shang-Chi. So at that point, it's all about a matter of speed. If Shang-Chi is able to land a good couple hits on Vision, then he should be able to take it. Now granted, Vision is part vibranium, so he definitely has the capability of tanking some hits from Shang-Chi and the rings. But the thing is that even though vibranium is the strongest metal on Earth, the 10 rings are implied to not even be from the main MCU dimension. When inspecting the rings, Wong states that there's no record of them in their codex and Comertage, meaning that they're definitely not from Earth, and Captain Marvel notes that they're not like any alien technology that she's seen. Plus, it's easy to put the rings on the age level of the Eternals, which is around 7,000 to 8,000 years old. So while the vibranium in Vision could help defend against the 10 rings attacks, in Vision's case, without the kinetic energy to help, Shang-Chi has more chances of dealing damage if he's able to land his attacks. Again, Vision being able to freely fly and phase through attacks gives him an edge over Shang-Chi a little bit, as well as being able to attack from the air while using the Mind Stone. So overall, I probably would give this Vision high difficulty, like 6 to 7 out of 10. And I guess this would be a good segue into the next respective fight against King T'Challa, the Black Panther. Now, right off the bat, T'Challa is strong, like physically strong. The Black Panther heart-shaped herb buff is no joke. I'll say this, that I do believe T'Challa edges out Shang-Chi in overall physical stats, while still giving it to Shang-Chi to be an overall better fighter in hand-to-hand. So, as I alluded to earlier in the Vision fight, I personally put the strength and power of the 10 rings over the durability of vibranium. However, we saw that in the first Avengers movie, Cap was able to effortlessly block and tank an attack from Mjolnir with his vibranium shield. So the vibranium is no joke. Now I've kind of seen arguments here and there that say that might be a difference in durability from a rigid shield rather than a suit of armor. But nonetheless, they're made from the same metal. And with the durability buff of the herb, T'Challa can tank some pretty serious hits, as shown when he tanked a full-on punch from a 5 Infinity Stone wearing Thanos. Albeit he was briefly out of commission, but still. Now I don't want to downplay the durability of the dragon armor on Shang-Chi, because the dragon scales come from the Great Protector Dragon, and the Great Protector Dragon is from another dimension. So for all we know, it could be just as durable as the vibranium armor on T'Challa, as evident when Shang-Chi tanked a 5-ring punch from Wenwu and was out of commission for arguably just as long as T'Challa was from the punch from Thanos. But overall, durability would probably still go to T'Challa due to both having vibranium armor plus the harp-shaped herb. Now, speed is another aspect that could be a problem. We see T'Challa is able to keep pace with Captain America in Infinity War, and assuming they're both charging at the enemy at full speed, this puts him on the same level of speed as a super soldier. So even with Shang-Chi having the rings to try to attack from a distance, there's a chance that with T'Challa's speed, reflexes, and agility, he might still be able to close the distance on Shang-Chi without getting hit by the rings. But Shang-Chi's reaction time shouldn't be dismissed either, as he was quick enough to react to and block each rings that were shot at him by Wenwu at point blank. So I could also see it just as likely as Shang-Chi being able to be quick enough to put up a force field in time in order to defend against T'Challa's attempts to blitz him, as well as being able to hit the ground hard enough to throw T'Challa off as he's running. Then there comes the aspect of the fight that I'm not too sure about, and that is the kinetic energy of the vibranium suit. The kinetic energy will definitely help T'Challa if Shang-Chi does end up dealing some damage, but the only problem is I don't know if there's an upper limit to how much force or power the suit can absorb. What I will say for that is that if the suit can absorb all the power from the 10 rings, then Shang-Chi is going to be in for a rude awakening. But if the rings are able to still overpower the suit's kinetic energy, then T'Challa will have an even harder time taking the win. So for this match, I actually say it's 50-50, but if the kinetic energy of the suit can absorb the attacks of the rings, then I think T'Challa takes it 6 out of 10. But if they can't, then I personally think Shang-Chi takes it 6 out of 10. And next up, we move on to Shang-Chi versus Doctor Strange, and I'll be honest, I like Shang-Chi way more than Doctor Strange, but Shang isn't ready for what Strange brings to the table. I mean, Doctor Strange was able to incapacitate Loki just by putting him into a falling room for 30 minutes. Realistically speaking, if somehow Strange's normal magic couldn't work, then he could just pull Shang-Chi into the mirror dimension where he utilizes magic way better and beat him there. And that's really all assuming Strange would just leave him there in order to take the win. The best case I could make for Shang-Chi is that he's depicted as being very intelligent. At the beginning of the Shang-Chi movie, his friend tells he and Kitty that they're not living up to their potential and says something along the lines of, "Shang, you speak like 6 languages, why are you just parking cars?" And it's shown that Wenwu wanted to train Shang-Chi's mind just as much as he trains his body. My point is that the best case scenario I could make for this is that if Strange pulls him into the mirror dimension, he might be able to outsmart Strange similar to how Spider-Man did, which granted is no minor feat because Strange is one of the most intelligent characters in the MCU. But being a genius is like Spider-Man's whole shtick. That's one of the things he's most known for. So I will give him more to that. But Shang-Chi's best chance is the best Strange in a battle of wits, and even that's a fight in itself. So yeah, Strange takes this one pretty handily. Next up, we have Shang-Chi versus Steve Rogers, aka Captain America. So first, we'll talk about Steve Rogers from Infinity War. For this one, it's going to be kind of tough for Cap. He's got the dual wielding shields, and he's obviously very good at hand-to-hand, but the rings are stronger in terms of AP, and I personally would still put Shang-Chi over Captain America in terms of hand-to-hand. Now, Captain America does have overall experience over Shang-Chi, I mean, that's for sure, and he's fought plenty of people outside of his weight class, including the likes of Ultron, Loki, and even holding off Thanos for a little bit. But with his martial arts and the rings, I just think he's got more of an edge over Steve from Infinity War. Now, to be fair, like I said earlier, Cap does have speed on the level of T'Challa, so like T'Challa, he might be quick enough to close the distance and deal some damage. But again, with the quick reflexes and reaction time of Shang-Chi, and him being able to get above Cap and or defend him by way of the energy field, as well as being able to attack from a range, I think Shang-Chi would hold the edge here. Not to mention that Dragon Scale armor would likely be able to tank just as much, if not more, than what Cap himself can tank. Now, we're talking about Cap from Endgame, with both his original shield plus Mjolnir. That's a different story. With both his shield and Thor's hammer, he's got much more range to work with. And combine both of them with Cap's physical stats, it does make for a pretty solid fight. Despite him never actually using Mjolnir, Cap was seemingly an expert with it, being able to utilize it with the shield at a couple of times. And just like the rings, both the shield and hammer are able to be thrown from a range and are capable of being able to come back to Cap almost immediately. So I do think this will be a crazy fight, because if we put Cap's durability on the same level as T'Challa, both of whom took a pretty serious hit from Thanos and were left in a similar state after, then it would mean Cap might be able to withstand some attacks from the rings. But it might depend on if Shang-Chi can charge them enough to do some lethal damage, because we saw what he was able to do to the Dweller in Darkness with just one charged attack from the rings. And just as Shang-Chi was about to launch his Kamehameha type blast at Wenwu, it's sort of implied that his attack was going to one-shot him, which is likely why he didn't end up following through with it. Now, do I think Cap is just going to sit there and let Shang-Chi charge him an attack like that? Probably not. Cap could totally respond by sending some lightning down with Mjolnir. And I know Shang-Chi is fast, but I don't think he'd be able to dodge lightning. Now, whether or not he'd be able to tank it is a different story. Now, if he's straight hit on the head with it, he's literally cooked. But if for a hypothetical case he's hit on the dragon scale armor, I'd say there's a chance he could take it given the durability feats for it. Overall, Endgame Cap versus Shang-Chi is very tough, and I think it could go either way, but I think Cap would have the edge due to the lightning attacks he's able to utilize in conjunction with the shield, physical stats, physical speed of his own, and strength and durability. Moving on to Shang-Chi versus Spider-Man. Now, there might be one line here that could decide this round. In Spider-Man Homecoming, Tony tells Peter that if Cap really wanted to, he could have taken him out. And if we put Shang-Chi above pre-Endgame Cap, then that would likely put Shang-Chi over Spider-Man. But I know that statements don't always decide an outcome, so let's dive deeper. So right off the bat, with his Spidey sense, I would probably put Peter's overall reaction time, reflexes, and agility over Shang-Chi. And of course, he's much more physically stronger than he is without the rings. But with the rings, given what we've seen them do against the Dweller, who should be stronger than anything Peter has fought up till now, excluding arguably the Thor Infinity Stone wearing Thanos, then the rings should scale higher than Peter. That said, Peter's strength is still no joke. He was able to stop Obsidian's attack on Tony in Infinity War and did so with what seemed like minimal effort. And Obsidian is implied to be a Hulk level combatant. At least that's what it seemed like when he was about ready to swap hands with Hulk in the beginning of the movie. Now, I don't know if Peter's travel speed is necessarily on par with his reflexes, but if so, then he might be able to close a distance in order to land a few good hits on Shang-Chi. But if not, Shang-Chi does have a chance for defense by using the rings, by way of using a force field or just straight up counterattacking. And if we do go by Tony's statement, and if we do put the rings on the strength level of Thor, who is definitely stronger than Cap, then that means a few good hits from the rings and Peter is out. Now, that's not to sleep on Peter's durability because it's also no joke. Arguably the most impressive feat for him, durability-wise, is him being able to tank Ant-Man's giant hand straight up smacking him. Even though Peter was out of commission afterwards, again, it's still pretty impressive that he was able to tank it. Now, one of the things that will come up in this fight is if Peter is able to web up Shang-Chi completely, like arms and all. Tony does remark that the strength of the webs is off the chart, and this is Tony who's seen the power of Thor. But we also see that the webs can be broken by such things as Hawkeye's arrows in Civil War. I know it's mainly due to it being a sharp object and all, but it's still an arrow, and the rings are definitely way more powerful than Hawkeye's arrows. So while I could see the webs being strong enough to hold Shang-Chi, I personally think it's more likely that Shang-Chi with the rings would be able to tear through them. Peter does have an aerial advantage of sorts, but not that much more of one, with Shang-Chi being able to use the rings as platforms and whips. Now, what I will say is that if this is Spider-Man from Infinity War and Endgame, he also has the Iron Spider armor, which has AI, reactive interface, and offers great durability and an insta-kill mode. All this combined with Peter's already impressive stats and feats, it looks closer and closer in his case. This one is definitely similar to the Captain America entry, where if this is normal Spider-Man at the beginning of the Infinity War, then I think Shang-Chi would have the edge high difficulty. But if Peter has the Iron Spider suit, then I think Peter takes the edge also high difficulty. Speaking of Iron, next up we have everyone's favorite genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist, Tony Stark, aka Iron Man. Now, just like Steve, Tony Stark has a pretty impressive catalog of fights against pretty impressive opponents to say the least. Anyone from Thor to Ultron to a 4 Infinity Stone wearing Thanos. And let's not forget about Tony being able to 1v2 two super soldiers and almost winning. So on that alone, Shang-Chi is in for a fight. And just like Shang-Chi, Tony can not only fight in close quarters, but can also fight pretty good from a range. I'll start off by saying that when it comes to Tony's long range, I'm not entirely sure if there's an upper limit to how much of the force field that Shang-Chi can withstand. With Tony's beams and blasts and missiles being strong enough to deal some damage to Thor, I could see it being likely that they could, but I could also see it being the opposite and that the rings are strong enough to defend. But at the very least, Tony will have to get in close and try to deal some lethal damage. When it comes to hand-to-hand, I still would put Shang-Chi over Tony here, but now here's something interesting. We saw that in Civil War, that Friday was able to analyze Steve Rogers' fight pattern and did so pretty much on the spot. So could Friday do the same thing here? I personally think she could, which at the very least would let Tony be on par with Shang-Chi in close quarters. Now, if Shang-Chi picks up on the fact that Tony is starting to match his fighting style, he could just as quickly change it up to throw him off. So So that means Shang-Chi will have to try and end the fight quick enough before Friday can analyze and react to his next fighting style. But then the question is, could he? Well, I'm not too sure. It would just depend on how much of the nanotech Iron Man suit can tank from the rings. Like I mentioned earlier, Tony has been able to go toe-to-toe with some pretty heavy hitters, and more often than not, his suit isn't always completely damaged. There have been instances where, like, Thor almost crushed his arm in the first Avengers movie, so there is an upper limit to how much they can withstand. But on the other hand, given what we've seen in Infinity War, Tony's suit was able to withstand a good series of punches from Thanos. And that's not even mentioning the fact that his iron shield was able to straight up block a blast from the Power Stone of all things. So the rings might have their work cut out for them in terms of getting through Tony's defenses. Now, I'm not saying it's not at all possible, especially if they are in fact on the level of Thor or Hulk, or even relative to them. There's also a possibility that with how much of a genius Tony is, he might be able to think of a strategy to throw Shang-Chi off as well. But even though he's not a tech genius like Tony, Shang-Chi's battle IQ would have at least be on par with Tony. Some might think that I'm reaching with that, but he was taught by a 1,000-year-old warrior and warlord in Wenwu, so I feel like he had plenty of insight on battle. This one's kinda tough, and it might come down to a matter of speed. I imagine at first Shang-Chi could throw hands faster than Tony, but if he is able to have Friday analyze his fight pattern quickly enough, he could create an opening. But if not, I think Tony might get slightly overwhelmed, especially if Shang-Chi manages to whip all 10 rings onto Tony's suit. I mean, at that point, he could just crush the suit completely. Same with the potential Kamehameha blast from the rings. Though, like with the Cap section, I'm not too sure if he had time to charge up an attack like that. Like, I don't think Tony's just going to sit there and wait for him to charge up that strong of a blast. So I think this is another 50-50 with giving the edge to a couple different scenarios. If Friday is able to quickly analyze every fight pattern from Shang-Chi, then I think Tony would be able to take it. But if Shang-Chi can quickly overwhelm him by strength of the rings and his martial arts before he either thinks to do so or before she can do it, then I think Shang-Chi can take it. Regardless, whoever wins, this will be high difficulty, like 6 out of 10. Now we have Shang-Chi going up against the Hulk. And off the top of my head, Hulk being able to at least make Surtur flinch when he attacked him was actually kind of impressive, considering neither Thor or Hela could do much damage to him. At least in terms when he grew as big as a mountain and destroyed Asgard. Now, I understand that some people might think I'm giving too much credit, as he subsequently got flicked off his head just a few minutes after, but I still thought it was worth mentioning. Now, I'm not really sure of which is stronger between Surtur and the Dweller in Darkness, but I think they have to be relative to each other, but I probably would say Surtur since he was able to destroy an entire planet within minutes. Now, I'll be honest, as much as I'm hyping the dragon armor in the early entries, for a good reason by the way, I'm not sure if they'll be able to survive a full-on punch from the Hulk, especially if it gets quickly followed up by a few more. So Shang-Chi has no room for error here. And while I do think his defenses could help, the strength of the Hulk is unreal, and I can't say with full certainty that I feel like he'd be able to last long enough against the Hulk's onslaught. Now, if we're putting the rings on the level of Thor and Hulk, then yes, in terms of AP, they should be able to give Hulk some trouble here. But to be honest, Shang-Chi's best chance here would be to repeatedly use the rings from a range and try to keep up an attack on the Hulk from a distance. And while I'm not sure if he'd be able to ultimately kill Hulk with it, we do see he's capable of being knocked out, which still would count as a win for Shang-Chi. Like with the previous entries, I do think a fully charged Kamehameha blast from the rings could do the job, but with Hulk consistently raging, I doubt Shang-Chi would have the time needed in order to do so. Especially if the Hulk is able to jump and leap across several meters, which would also help against the Shang-Chi aerial advantage too. I personally think this one's also 50-50 because the power of the rings could deal some serious damage and incapacitate Hulk, but at the same time, Hulk just has way too much raw damage that if Shang-Chi can't continually keep up the attack from a distance or knock him out quickly, the better the chances are for Hulk that he's going to have to take him out. So I believe Hulk has the overall edge in this fight, like 6 or 7 out of 10. I think it's a bit more in his favor if this is Professor Hulk from Endgame, since he'll be able to utilize all his strength more strategically.
Now we have Shang-Chi versus the mighty Thor. Now, if we're talking Thor from the beginning of the Infinity War movie, then I think this would actually be pretty interesting. If the rings are on the level of Thor without his weapons, then being Shang-Chi is likely a better hand-to-hand fighter than Thor. I think Shang-Chi would actually do pretty well. But then, here's the thing. Thor at this point is able to incorporate lightning attacks into his melee style of fighting, and we saw what just 2 strikes were capable of doing to Hulk in Thor Ragnarok, not to mention his giant lightning strike on Hela later in the movie. And even with the dragon armor, I'm not too sure Shang-Chi could tank an attack like that head on. Regular lightning is one thing, but a lightning strike from Thor is something else. Now, this is Thor from the second half of Infinity War with Stormbreaker. Forget it. Setting aside the fact that he could shoot lightning from a distance with it, the fact that it was completely able to overpower a blast from a full Infinity Gauntlet Thanos is absolutely crazy. And this wasn't a Dragon Ball Goku versus Vegeta Kamehameha Gallic Gun beam struggle type deal. This was Stormbreaker like ate that up and still managed to penetrate Thanos' chest and almost kill him. 10 rings are powerful, but I'm not sure they're that powerful. Now, if we're talking about the fat Thor from Endgame, I'd say Shang-Chi might have an easier time fighting him since Thor is not exactly in the best fighting shape, so he could possibly outpace Thor and take him down. But then Thor now has both Stormbreaker and Mjolnir to balance that out. And fat Thor or not, it's still Thor. He's still crazy strong, even if he's not in his peak condition. So while I do think Shang-Chi can perform better here, and I do think there's a possibility he can win, I think I still give it to Thor overall. So if it's base Thor without his weapons, I'd say it's 50-50 and could go either way. But if it's Thor with Stormbreaker and Infinity War, Thor takes it like 9 times out of 10. And if it's fat Thor from Endgame, Thor still wins like 7 or 8 out of 10 times. And finally, we have Captain Marvel. And honestly, this is kind of the same deal as Thor. Like, if it's base Carol Danvers, then I think that Shang-Chi would actually do pretty well. But at any point she goes into her binary form, forget it. Again, setting aside the fact that she can just increase her strength and overall stats exponentially in her binary form, the fact that she's able to absorb any cosmic energy is going to give her an advantage. Meaning, of course, that she can absorb the energy from the 10 rings. And like I said earlier in the beginning of the video, I'm not sure if there's a finite amount of energy that the 10 rings possibly have, but in any case, her being able to absorb any energy from the rings is going to help her chances of winning and lessen Shang-Chi's chances of winning. So, I mean, this one is kind of quick, but Captain Marvel is one of the most powerful beings in the cosmic universe. The fact that she was able to just tank a full-on headbutt from Thanos and treated it almost as if it was a joke and still took a point-blank hit from the Power Stone. And later in the deleted scene where all the Avengers kneel, you can see that she wasn't really even damaged in the slightest. She was still standing up like she was perfectly fine. So she completely tanked that Power Stone hit. So yeah, I think overall Captain Marvel has this one too. So there's the rest of the video. I hope you guys did enjoy this one. I was really excited to do this one since it's my very first Marvel versus battle video. I really hope that y'all enjoyed it, and let me know in the comments what you guys think. Let me know in the comments, where do you think Shang-Chi stops at? Do you think he stops at Iron Man, Captain America, Thor? Do you think he possibly could be Captain Marvel? Let me know in the comments. Thank you all for watching. Be sure to leave a like if you haven't already. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Click the bell for more notifications. List some more ideas in the comments below. Till my next one.